I don't know. All right. This could be a little longish tonight because we do want to get everything in before, so we have a nice big assignment to do over the holidays. We have this sing-along. On Sunday nights we have a prayer group here, but the prayer group puts on this festive sing-along, and it's everything you can think of, rocking around the Christmas tree, and I'll have a blue Christmas without you, and all the traditionals. And anybody who's in any way interested in the store or who knows anybody that attends anything around here, we usually have about 50 people and a very good pianist. On the main island in the front is a invitation, and it's got a map to how to get there and all of that. And it's a real nice event if you want to do that. And we have one other piece of business. I have to eat humble pie and admit that I was wrong. Last time Jerry and I were having a vehement argument about Mercury retrograde, and then late at night when I was laying in bed thinking about the day, I remembered that there was a retrograde conjunction, so that Mercury had to be on both sides of the sun when retrograde. And I was remembering the picture. And so what I've done, if you will, just want to pass it around and look at it, this inner circle is a circular orbit of Mercury. This is not highly accurate, but it's reasonably accurate. And starting from over here is Mercury moving one day at a time. And then this outer circle is the Earth moving one day at a time. And then the position of Mercury on the first day is here. And gradually you see that it turns around and goes backwards. And this shows one whole retrograde cycle of Mercury if you want to pass it around. If you need an explanation, further explanation, I'll go ahead with that. We have a lot of handouts tonight. Paper companies will love me. All right, we are trying to learn how to do character profiling. Profiling of the very broad general things in the chart. And right now we're working on attitude profiles, and that is the profiles associated with the signs. And those are signs that give qualities or flavor of character. We're trying to approach the spiritual attitudes that are indicated by the signs. We're trying to approach them by using spiritual mathematics, because spiritual mathematics is one of the languages, probably the deepest language of the spirit. And so we're going to ponder mathematical ideas to get introduced to the primarily to the attributes and elements tonight. And so this is going to be, I'm a frustrated spiritual mathematician. I think that several lives ago I was probably an underling. I maybe swept the floors for the Orphic mathematicians, and it stuck with me. And I have all of these ideas about spiritual mathematics that are weird, that probably most people would put me in the insane asylum for. So what we're going to be talking about is not computational mathematics. And we're not going to try and weigh and measure the spirit, but we're going to look at mathematics as an abstract language. And as such, it is probably the deepest and it's the most simple abstract mathematics, and it points at the most basic, essential characteristics of spirit. And so we started out doing some of that last time. We said that a horoscope is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional reality, the visible universe. If we add in time, it's also a quasi-four-dimensional reality that is shown in a horoscope. We said that in three-dimensional space, in pure mathematical three-dimensional space, the most points that had only position but no size, the most points that you could get around one central point was 12 around the 13th. And we said then that in the three-dimensional world that we live in, that represents the 12 basic outlooks about any reality. Each viewpoint, each of the 12 viewpoints, represents a viewpoint that is completely unique and different from all the others. Of course, when you look at it mathematically, you only get a positional relationship. But within that positional relationship, there is also a flavored relationship, which you get when you look at the 12 signs of the zodiac as the flat two-dimensional representation of 12 around the 13th. Thus, each one of the signs of the zodiac represents an atom of consciousness, an atom of human character or a spiritual character. It can't be reduced any further. Since we're trying to get a balanced and whole or comprehensive understanding of character, we want to draw profiles that include everything but are equally balanced. And we said last time that in terms of mathematics, that the only way that we could get balanced profiles is if they related factors of 12, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. They would include everything and they would be completely balanced. Last time we spoke about the profile of 1, which we did in the very beginning, looking at the whole of the horoscope as 1. Whether it's signs or houses, you looked at the totality of it. And last time we also spoke of 2. We're just going right down the list of factors. And we said that 2 represented the basic extrovertive and introvertive dualities associated with the positive signs and the negative signs. The positive signs being the odd-numbered signs and the negative signs being the even-numbered signs. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, but we want to get to 3 and 4 tonight because they're probably the most important profiles of all the ones that we're going to look at in the attitude profiles. So, let's start doing that. With attitude profiles, we're trying to look directly at the character of spirit, because signs represent spiritual attitudes. Even if those attitudes are about material things, they're still spiritual attitudes. Houses represent material opportunities. Now, it's not an easy thing to understand things of the Spirit, because the Spirit is essentially invisible. The Bible tells us God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. Same thing about knowledge. The great German mystic Meister Eckhart said, one does not see God with the same eyes with which one sees a cow. So when you're talking about seeing the Spirit or trying to apperceive the Spirit with the mind or with the feelings, you don't do that in the same way that you look at the landscape around you. One sees Spirit with the eye of the Spirit. Since none of us probably are great seers, or at least seers of an order high enough that we can see directly into the realms of spirit, maybe if some of us that have marginal psychic consciousness and see into the lower worlds, we have to try to approach the spirit using different tools. The same tools that are used by seers who do see the spirit. The great holy seers of all times, all religions, all cultures tell us that spirit transcends everything we normally experience, and that there are really no words from our normal experience that can talk about it. Spirit is beyond sensible matter. It's even beyond energy. It's beyond emotion. And it's even beyond concrete thought. Abstract thought, or ideational thought, which is universal, is quasi-spiritual. It's like partly relating to the spiritual worlds and partly relating to the phenomenal worlds. Ideas are universal, like the spirit is universal. But they still have internal limitations, limits. Those idea limits can usually be found right in the formulae that represent the ideas. There are sort of internal checks and balances. Most of the spirit is beyond even the ideas of mathematics or any other idea that we think. So even though we're working with mathematics, we're working with something that is beyond mathematics, and we're just reflecting off of mathematical ideas in a manner analogous to the way the dentist reflects off a mirror to see areas that you can't see with the eye. Things that we can't see with the mind, we reflect off of mathematics. The deepest region of ideas, as agreed by all spiritual philosophers, is the region of mathematics and logic, called the region of the geminal ideas of form. That is, those basic mathematical ideas which describe or underlay everything in existence. Those ideas, the mathematical and logical ideas, are so deep that they abut what is called the cosmic logos, out of which everything comes. So, we're going to try and look at spirit in terms of mathematics. A peculiar thing about mathematical ideas which reflect spiritual characteristics is that the mathematical ideas themselves are invisible. So we're using something invisible to describe something even more invisible, which is a very, very difficult thing. So when we draw dots on a piece of paper or lines on the blackboard, those are material representations of dots that are really invisible. And those dots that are invisible represent something even beyond them. This approach is gibberish, you know. All of the deepest and best things approach gibberish. If we try to think about these things too concretely, we boggle our minds, we confound ourselves, and we do seem like we're speaking gibberish. In fact, I've had experiences like that. I've had friends that have entered into the mental institution, and I'd go over and visit them at the mental institution, and it's strange that a lot of people over there are loosely connected to their physical bodies. As a consequence, they're really sensitive, and they pick up everything around them. And I sit at home and ponder spiritual mathematics. Sometimes. It isn't always porn. And I've had it happen that I'm there visiting somebody over in Mendota, and somebody would come walking by and hang around, and they start talking about trapezoids. It's kind of unnerving at first that here's somebody who's probably never had a math course or a geometry course in their life is suddenly talking about trapezoids, which is what you happen to have been thinking about in the last week. And you say, well, maybe they are all geniuses. Oh, it's tough. In some cases, they are really geniuses. If we think about everything analogously or metaphorically, we're much more likely to be successful when we're using spiritual mathematics. Every day, we look at our friends and we look at people around us, and we know what comes from these friends. It's profound and it's wonderful. And we know right off the bat that they're not just pieces of flesh or flesh and bone, as it's always said. We know that their character is always essentially invisible. We can't see it. And that real character, that true spiritual nature, is much more than the body can contain. The spirit is a great the bodies are great condensations of the spirit. The spirit is ever so much more than any of our vehicles. But it does a pretty good job of expressing itself through the bodies. We know our friends, especially our friends of the opposite sex, would protest if we considered them to be no more than their bodies. And if we don't appreciate the character, immediately there is great protestation. So, when we say a point represents being in position or being in location, we're not speaking about the dot on the paper. We're talking about something much more than a mathematical point. We're talking about the entirety of mathematical space, which represents the entirety of spirit in the way it is defined and located and posits its being through what we call a point. So our visible drawings are lesser abstractions of greater abstractions that are the mathematical ideas, which are themselves reflections. So last time we talked of duality and direction. We said of the basic dualities there was outwardness and inwardness. We could have said that 2 is the least number of points to define a straight line. In spiritual mathematics, a straight line represents the most directed consciousness. A true straight line in mathematics has no width. It has only direction. In some ways, it doesn't really even have length, because it goes on as far as one can conceive it going on. Nobody knows whether it goes any further when you quit conceiving. But when you think about a line and you say that it has only direction, you ask yourself, which direction? This way or that way? And in mathematics or in directed spiritual consciousness, it doesn't make any difference. when once a line has been projected, it is immediately bidirectional. We can look at one direction of it and call it a vector, but really it's a bidirectional entity. What we're saying is that there can't be any outwardness without there also being inwardness. And it's the same line that represents outwardness that represents inwardness. So even if we are intentionally and deliberately directing all of our consciousness outward, it doesn't mean that there isn't at the same time something coming in. We can't look at something outside of ourselves without the perception entering us at the same time. It's a very bidirectional activity. A performer without feedback, even though it might be silent or invisible feedback, a performer without feedback couldn't do anything. You just fall to pieces. There is no communication. You're not interacting with anyone. Complete communication is part of that bidirectional projection. Performers know that because they start projecting themselves out, and the line of projection that goes out to everybody also carries things back from everyone, and so that the performer gets a stage high. So much so they get so addicted to the stage high that they can do things that they can't do normally when they're not performing. And then they come off the stage and they want to stay that way. I remember wanting to stay that way. And so what you do is you take drugs or do whatever you can to stay that way all the time. So if we had a horoscope that had all the planets and the primary angles, the ascendant and midheaven, if they were all in positive signs, we wouldn't say that this person had no introversion. They may not pay attention to it. They may not value it. Their whole life may be based on being outward, but it's still there. When we're doing these tests and profiles, we're talking about what the person does with deliberation. There is always the other direction at the same time. Now, straight line consciousness always makes us feel uncomfortable. And it's not because it is directional or bidirectional. We feel uneasy because we don't know how far the line goes. It's nice to say it goes as far as our consciousness takes it, but its potential of being endless or of being eternal makes us feel uneasy. Things that are eternal always make material and earthly people feel uneasy. We've experienced this uneasiness in a number of ways. A line that goes out infinitely without touching our sphere of activity is called a tangent. And we've all been around somebody that's gone out on a tangent. Somebody has lost relevance, and they go on and on and on and on and on, and it seems like they're never going to end. It sounds like one of these classes. It's lost reference. People, for example, who have a big majority of planets in positive signs are like that. They're almost like the jazz solos used to be back in the 60s. And the other players would walk off the bandstand. Somebody would start out a solo and they'd go for 20 minutes. And then they'd go out and get something to eat and they'd come back on and the guy'd still be soloing yet. Tangential. The uneasiness that is in linear consciousness or in dualism we experience in other ways. When you're on one side of the line, the grass is always greener on the other side. There's something about the subjectivity of being in one position that always feels inferior, whereas that virgin, untouched other side of the line always seems like a field that's wide open for everything. So that old statement, the grass is always greener, is a perfect statement for describing the duality of the positive and negative signs. Another way it manifests is we can be possessive of our side of the line. George Bush just drew a line in the sand. He might just as well have drawn it in water because it's not clear where that line is. So both of these things, whether the line is extended further and further, or whether you're on one side of the line or the other, those are the things that come about with dualities. Several years ago, we did a mythology course on myths of the origin of evil. And we spent an entire year talking about the dualism of the Zoroastrians. And it was very, very uncomfortable. It was intellectual dualism, a non-connected dualism that was exceedingly creepy. So they both describe the uncertainty of direction without objectivity. Objectivity in mathematics, in spirit, and in material reality is obtained by triangulation, by adding a reference point off of the line. So we're now moving into the 3, which is our topic for tonight, which will probably be shorter than the whole introduction to it. That point and any 2 points on a line form a triangle. Any 3 points form a triangle. By connecting the external reference point to the 2 points on the line, that creates a triangle right there. It produces a triangle and 3 straight lines, all of which carry out to infinity beyond the triangle, but they form that triangle. The least number of straight lines or projected consciousness, directed consciousness, that produce an object in 2-dimensional space or any n-dimensional space, 2 or beyond, 2 or greater than 2, is 3. That's the least number of points and the least number of lines that produce an object. Therefore, the triangle represents the simplest and most fundamental objectification in space or in spirit. A point gives position or location, but without size or scope or direction. A point just is. A line gives direction and extension, but without limitation or without objectivity. The triangle gives objectivity. It creates an object, and it gives us a consciousness that all of that amorphous, that shapeless space suddenly is objectified because within it there is an object. It has a location like a point, but it is referenced to itself. Those 3 points, like make a little click so that they're all together. It has lines within it. It has delineation, but the lines form line segments, because the legs of the triangle are called line segments. So there's a limitation there. And so there is that kind of objectification that we're talking about with mathematical ideas that have an internal limitation. So in all spiritual philosophies and mystical outlooks on spirituality, which eventually become religions when they go downhill, it represents objectified spiritual consciousness, threefold spiritual consciousness. The triangle, especially the equilateral triangle, which is completely balanced, is said to represent manifest spirit, whereas all of mathematical or pure spiritual space represents unmanifest spirit. So a triangle as manifest spirit represents a being, not just beingness, or not just being, but a being. There are always 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. Each of the 3 points represents a position. Each of the points is a child, you might say, of 2 directions of consciousness. 2 lines always cross to create that point. We're going along real fine. Maybe it might not be long tonight. Each of the vertices is a result of partnering self and not self. Without the third, each would engage in an endless dualistic relationship. There would be an other, but it would be an undefined, eternal other and without objectivity. Thus, one, or a being, is born in 3, and 3 are born in 1. Put in religious terms, each represents a state of spirit relative to non-being, which is all the rest of space. But when the 3 are an entity, it's like saying God is born. Each has its being in reference to the others. But each point can speak for the objectified whole, because it is a triangulation. All cultures have something to do with this. Right outside of Chard's hometown, there was an immense statue that overlooked the bay. You know what I'm talking about? The Trimurti. It's a great statue where the 3 faces of God were in one head, and each had a characteristic that was all of its own. What a big, immense thing about that tall, right? Just the heads. Yeah. Have you gone to see it ever? It's on an island right outside the Bay of Bombay. Yeah. Murti means face. It's called the Trimurti. In the West, we call it God in 3 persons, which would better be said God in 3 individualizations or in 3 realities. But there are all sorts of theological things we could talk about it, but we don't want to get into that. So in the West, we often hear God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. An example of one of the points speaking for the whole is when Jehovah in the Old Testament says, I am that I am. It's a statement of objectified being. All right, we're looking at the factor of 3. We're looking at the 3 quadruplicities of the zodiac. Now we'll dive into the astrology for about 2 minutes. But just a little bit more spiritual mathematics. We want to be really clear about what each of these profiles means, what it reveals. And we want to not confuse things. Because when you're dealing with something as multidimensional and multifaceted and as fluid as things of the Spirit can be, it's easy to confuse one thing for another. And Shard can tell you that even though mathematics is very, very abstract, it is also very, very precise. Ideas are clear and they are indubitable. So we don't want to confuse one thing for another. With these profiles, we can say a lot of things, but we have to be careful about what we're looking at. There's always going to be some blending of one astrological thing into another. That's unavoidable because it is one reality. But because the stuff of the soul is very fluid, it's difficult to keep from having boring or fuzziness. We'll try as much as we can. Another reason for looking at the mathematical thought, which is so clear, is that the triangle does represent objective manifest spirit. But our consciousness, as it is now, is so bound up in matter that it requires us a lot of familiarization to become familiar with the ways of the Spirit. I believe there is that scriptural quote that says, "My ways are not your ways," meaning to say the things of heaven are strange to the things of earth. Our consciousness, focused here at this time, is the consciousness of parts, of things. We have partial consciousness. We see things from isolated vantage points. And we see them in matter. For the most part, in this world, we see everything in opaque matter. So our consciousness is subjective because of the isolation. Consciousness of spirit is universal. Consciousness of totality. It is objective because it sees everything from all points simultaneously. Thus, the 3 points of the spirit are all visible, or one is visible from all 3 points at the same time, even though each represents a particular figure. Beside completing and objectifying a figure, each of the 3 points knows where it is. I am here. Where are you? It knows who and what it is. But it knows it better in reference to the other 2. This is how all navigation, whether it be aerial navigation or naval navigation, and to some extent even through surveying, all ground or terrestrial navigation is accomplished. It's accomplished through triangulation, to know who you are and what you are. Now, there is one part of triangulation that is very important to what we're trying to do, especially in astrology. And that might be called the referential character of the triangle. None of the 3 points can be understood by itself. Each must be understood in reference to the other 2. If you have only 2 points, you don't know where you are. It's like an argument. my point and your point. When you have a third point, by referencing each point to the other, with the third point being something like a mediator or an objectifier, you come up with that kind of consciousness. I'm trying as many ways as I can to talk about what three-point consciousness is like. This is one of the reasons that spiritual consciousness is so hard to understand. We understand a whole, but any facet or any objectification within that whole is always referenced to another point, and to another point, and it keeps going between three basic points of view, and that is a kind of consciousness that's hard for us to verbalize. It is that whole idea of three being in one and one being in three that is very, very difficult. This referential consciousness was shown in Greek mythology by the Grace Sisters. The Grace Sisters were three weird ladies that had all kinds of spiritual powers. They had necks that were long like goose necks, but they only had one eye, and they passed the eye back and forth to each other. And even though they had all this wisdom, they couldn't come to an understanding until the eye had been passed to all three of them. And when they had all 3 points of view, then they could prophesy, or then they could make something known. And in fact, the Grey Sisters were called the Grey, and they formed the ancient religion of Greece. And the name Greece is the people of the Grey, Greis. That's where the name actually comes from. But at any rate, that's a statement of referential consciousness. See, our consciousness is bound up in matter. I don't know how to say it. When we reach three-point consciousness or spiritual consciousness, it's uncomfortable to us, almost as uncomfortable as two-point consciousness or the line. See, we're so materialistic that we can't understand the holistic consciousness. We have to break it down into something that's more familiar to us. We break it down into material consciousness, into squares. We think me first. We don't think me relative to everything. Or we don't reference our being relative to other things. When you have three-point consciousness, you have attributive consciousness. An attribute is an inherent, intrinsic idea that gives you the character of something. And that is referring, again, it's the referential consciousness to the character of something from 3 points of view. It's not like a knob or a gear or something like that. It's from one of 3 reference points. And that's what we're trying to get at. This is going along very fast. In astrology, the attributes, the astrological attributes, are called the cardinal, the fixed, and the common signs. The cardinal signs being Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. The fixed signs being Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And the common signs being called Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. These 3 signs are referential to each other. For example, if we just take one thing and relate it to all 3 signs, it's going to be a little tedious, but it's almost like one of those symbolic logic classes that is very, very tedious. Suppose we take the fixed signs. The opposite of fixed is not active. That's what most people would think the opposite of fixed is. The opposite of fixed is not fixed. It represents A not fixed state represents a state that is not fixed, but that is capable of change. It's variable. So a not active sign, the opposite of active is not fixed. The active is not active. So a way that you can look at to get the sense of the profile of the kind of consciousness so that you don't confuse this with elements after a while is if you think of fixed, changing, and capable of change. There is that logical state that is not active and not fixed, that means capable of change. And then you have the relationship of cardinal signs, fixed signs, the common signs. It's a logical distinction, but it's a very important one. The cardinal signs are called active because they are an active change. The seasons actively change. The light changes, like at the equinoctial signs, the length of the days and nights changes. After Aries, the days are longer than the nights, and after Libra, the nights are longer than the days. But from the beginning of Capricorn, the days become longer, whether they're shorter than the nights or not. And after, they represent basic changes, not changeability. But at the end of the season, just before you're changed, there's that you're starting to waver, so that there is the possibility that things could change. And so the common signs are like that. So like if you have someone or something that, suppose you had somebody had all the planets in fixed signs, and they had to work with somebody that had all the planets in cardinal signs, it would be like the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. Nothing could be done. Before you can have a change from fixity to activity, or before activity can result in something unchangeable or something stable, you have to have something in between. You have to have an arbitrator. You have to have a middle person. And so you have the common signs, which are middle people. But if you have a person who's all common signs, the all common sign person is all middle, and it can't rest on anything, and it's changing all the time, or it's wanting to change all the time, and it has no reference of anything outside of itself. Now, we could follow out the logic of all of these things in a very tedious way. We'll leave that all for your private study. You'll do that in between the times when you need to rest your eyes from reading all those biographies and autobiographies you're going to be reading. You'll want to sit down and contemplate so you can work out all of the logical cases of not this as a state in between. Yes. Yes. Because the reference of the common signs is not to have a position. It's like to be willing to be anything, to be many things to many people. That is its position. All right. All right, we have enough so that we have the gist of attribute kind of consciousness. One cannot change relative to eternity without understanding changeability, and one cannot understand fixity relative to change without understanding changeability. And finally, one cannot understand changeability without having understood the states of fixity and changing. All right, that's simple. That's a one-sentence statement of it, which I probably should have made. Yes?
One question about this, and it deals with the threes. I mean, you've heard the statement, it's good to have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. So you have to have an arrangement between fixed, cardinal, and
I wouldn't have applied that.
You would not
No,
do that?
no, because beginnings and ends are things in this world, where this world is all defined by limitations. That's not the kind of three-part consciousness of the spiritual world. The three-part consciousness of the spiritual world is always referring to something else and referring to something else. It never, you know.
What I was getting at is in reference to one sign acting on another to accomplish a third or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but to have a terminus, no. They never have a terminus. All right. Differentiating 3 from 2 is relatively simple. When we had dualism, and we drew profiles of dualism, we have black and white, and the amount of black versus the amount of white indicates the grayness of the character. Gray is more or less one or the other, but gray is not color. The world of color has another dimension in it, and it's a very lively dimension. It's bright, it's clear. But the world of color is such that it isn't definitely one thing or another. Again, if you have 3 primary pigments, red, yellow, or blue, or you have 3 primary beams of light, red, green, and blue, everything else is made from combinations, referring to how cardinal, or what I'm trying to say is that a profile of the attributes gives you something like a color. That by mixing so much of one attribute with so much of another attribute, or so much of yet another attribute, gives you a distinct hue. That is a thing all to itself. And that's what we're trying to get to with the profile by attributes. There's much more that we could do with mathematical philosophy, but I can see that this is not a crowd that's sweet on mathematical philosophy, spiritual mathematical philosophy. We could have looked at this all in terms of numbers and of number theory, which would be every bit as fruitful as the simple geometry that we used. But that gets too much. I'm frustrated because spiritual mathematics, for about the last 16 or 1700 years, has been left untouched. And many of the very basic things implied by the simplest geometry or the simplest arithmetic are still not worked into waking spiritual consciousness as far as our life is concerned. And maybe someday I'll get to write a book on spiritual mathematics that nobody will want to read, but they won't have to. It'll be there. I'd like to do it, but I don't know that I ever will. Let's turn and use something else instead and look at keywords. We're going to look at keywords or key concepts and try to keep in mind that the words themselves are pretty limited. And what we want is we want the referential consciousness of not fixed, not moving, but that references between the 3 states, or like a color that's made up of 3 other colors. That's what we're trying to get at. The words are brought down to a very material level, and they're very unsatisfactory. Spirit is in everything. Even in this world, Spirit is in everything, but it's not in everything in the same way a transmission is in a car. All of the lists that we're going to look at here and the sub-lists are extremely incomplete. At one time, I sat down with a whole pile of science books, and I was going to go through all the basic sciences. I was going to go through geology and meteorology and chemistry and physics. I was going to go through all of them. I was going to pick out the simple things that related to polarities and triplicities and quadruplicities, and I was going to take all those principles and I was going to relate them to the signs of the zodiac and to the astrological elements. And it was fascinating to do, but it was so huge that I never got very far at it all. But every now and then, they come jogging back into mind. And it's again, if you get tired of reading biographies, you can sit down with elementary science books and do it that way. Now, these could be much, much more extensive, but this is something to get you started. And one thing, when you're looking at these keywords or these key concepts, it's much better to work with adverbs. But if adverbs don't work, then adjectives come along. And adjectives are much better than working with nouns, which are material things. All right, the way the charts are, there are breaks along the way. I took the standard divinities as they relate to the most common religions that deal with triplicities, or with 3 and 1 or 1 and 3. And then the second part, the divine characteristic, is very important. It shows you 3 different outlooks that have been ascribed to the different divinities throughout history. Like, let's see. Let's take the bottom one. In the divine characteristics, Brahm is the willer that wills everything into existence. Vishnu is the weaver, but the spinner and the dancer is always Shiv. So these are things, like many of them, like when you're talking about creation, execution, and organization, those come from the Neoplatonists. Or creation, emanation, and fabrication are from the Neoplatonists. Power, word, and motion are from other Greek philosophical schools. Father, the mother, and the offspring is pretty much universal to all societies. Will, imagination, and conceptualization are, that's pretty much philosophically common to all schools. Cultural vehicles or things in nature, this could be books long, but like, for example, we just take the blue, yellow, and red, or right within color itself. The variation of colors is found in the hue, which is in the third principle. The saturation, that is the intensity of the color, is an assertion of the will, whereas the brightness, how much whiteness or how much darkness, that is associated with the common signs. In mathematics itself, which we were just speaking of, geometry, which looks at permanent relationships, is associated with the will factor. Synthesis and analysis, which has to do with curves and the adding and subtracting or breaking down of curves or building them up, is associated with the word. Whereas the spinner, or how frequently things happen, is always associated with the name, or with arithmetic, counting how many times. Then getting down into the final one is what we'll probably use more. The cardinal signs are executive. They do things. They execute. The judicial signs make the arbitrary or the final judgments, whereas the legislative signs do all of the debating and putting things together. Activity, inertia, and facilitation, that's pretty clear. Change, permanence, variability, we've looked quite a bit at that. Drive versus determination versus dream or idea, all fairly simple. Now, what I didn't go into here are some of the attitudes, that personality attitudes. Obviously, something like will when it gets perverted, becomes stubbornness. And something like activity becomes something like forcefulness. Or something like variability becomes vacillation. And so, but from the ideas that are in the tables, you should be able to have something to begin to draw profiles out of the charts. Now, what it says in that paragraph in the bottom, it's very rare that you find someone that is all one way or all the other way. So that one of the attributes is accentuated and the other two are very weak. Usually, two of the attributes are strong and one is weak. And so I have made some attribute pairs on the second page. And so we have like a cardinal fixed person being something like a bowling ball or a cannonball or something like that. It has the mass of the fixed signs, but the drive and the motion of the cardinal signs, and it's powerful. There's a struggle in that. It's sort of like trying to hold your foot on the brake and hit the gas pedal at the same time. And there's a weakness in that. It doesn't have the steering, or it doesn't have the intellectual guidance. These are, again, tables that you can add a lot of things to. A fixed common person makes a lot of theories, and they're very deep. But the fixed person wants axioms, and the common sign person wants everything as tentative or theoretical hypotheses. And the cardinal signs being missing indicates that there's no active test. And finally, cardinal common people, we run into a lot of those kind of people. They do their thinking on the fly. They're in action, and they do their thinking then. And if there's somebody that doesn't even want to have brakes on the car, the car isn't supposed to be stopped. It's supposed to be going all the time. But you get pretty much the idea. I think that should be enough to get you started with profiling. All right, now we're set to go on to the number 4, the factor partner of 3. Numerically, 4 is very different than 3 because 3 is a prime number. It can't be broken down. In the same way the triangle can't be broken down without there being an object, that means primeness. But 4 is equally divisible. It's equally divisible into 2 times 2. And 4 belongs to a whole group of numbers that are called the doubling numbers. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 5, 12, 10, 24. Anybody who's worked with computers knows all of those numbers. This is the way most of our knowledge is put together now. It is by the doubling numbers, because the doubling numbers mean on and off. In a computer, and even if you teach a computer to write like Franz Kafka, you're doing it with the doubling numbers, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. When we discussed 2, we saw that it was a clear-cut thing. Yes or no? On my side of the line or your side of the line? It's an in answer or it's an out answer. 4 is a continuation of that black and white. It's a binary logic taken into a different dimension. Like in the most classical example of it is in the Parmenides by Plato, in which Parmenides teaches Socrates a lesson, and he starts the whole basis of logic that has become the logic of computers. He says there's the positive of things and there's the negative of things. But there's a positive positive and a negative positive, and a positive negative and a negative negative. And from the basis of this, he showed the whole shading of using the dialectic method the yes-no method to understand any philosophical issue. This was later formalized by Aristotle, who literally made the square of logic with the subtrahends and the minuends and, I don't know, all those other square dance terms. I don't remember them anymore. Binary logic is the logic of our computers. The factorability of 4 is similar to the geometric relationship between triangles and quadrangles. You can't break a triangle into anything but other triangles. No other figure will work. You can't break the area inside of a triangle into anything else but triangles. However, quadrangles can be broken into quadrangles or triangles. So there is a different kind of consciousness that is associated with a quadrangle, or with the square being the idealized quadrangle. So we can say that with triangles you can generate a quadrangle. But with a quadrangle you can't generate a triangle. It's a breakdown. It's a reduction of a quadrangle to come to a triangle. Then you ask the question, if all polyhedra can be reduced to triangles, why even have any other figure than a triangle? You know, why have all of those other figures? This actually happens. There are spiritual philosophers in the world that say, why do we even have this material world here? The world of spirit is enough. The world of triangles is enough. And all of this is illusion. We don't need anything more. And they think that way. It actually happens in the world. The answer lies in the fact that the consciousness of the other polyhedra, especially the quadrangles, is different. Everything is triangular because the spirit is in everything. And it has that holistic character about it. It has the universal referential consciousness. But it isn't testable. It isn't building. And it isn't externally measurable. And if you want to know about the unknown, you have to be able to experiment. And the consciousness, the simplest consciousness of experimentation, comes with the quadrangle or with the square. The spirit needs something outside of itself, even if that outside of itself is within it. I don't know how to say it any other way. Getting close to gibberish. It grows within itself by externalizing something within itself. Our consciousness is square consciousness. We have difficulty with trine consciousness. The reason why is because we are in matter. And matter is the stuff of the square as opposed to spirit. The best example is in area. Chard can tell you, you could take any curve and measure the area of it. You could break it up into how many triangles fit in there. It becomes a god-awful job to do, but we still wouldn't understand it because area is like an external manifestation. It's like a construction. It's like a building. And so in order to understand area, you say, how many square units are in it? And it is that square, testable consciousness that we live by. And that is what the number 4 is associated with. It looks at things with that building kind of consciousness. So that when we measure the area of a circle, we say it's pi r squared. Or even the area of a triangle is 1/2, or again using the 2, of the base times the altitude. You have to understand it in square. So this testing, this construction, or this reduction of things into squares is, in astrology, breaking things down into 4 elements. When we look at the square in the same way we looked at a triangle, we see that things are different. Any one point can directly reference one of the other points, 2 of the other points, but there's always that opposite point that to reference it directly is to reduce the triangle, and reduce the square into 2 triangles. And when you do that, you have broken down, you've trained it, put it into the referential consciousness, and you've taken away that external objectivity. You might say, if you have a square and you're looking at the world from point A, you can directly reference to B and C, but when you look at D, you're making a mirror image from an opposite point of view, a material point of view that references the same 2 points, and that gives you the understanding from an objectified understanding that is measurable, that is testable. I don't know how to put it in words any better. Charlotte might be able to do it. You want to try it? It's non-referential consciousness. So the external reference is always complementary. See, because it's got that opposition in. It gives that alternate kind of viewpoint. And that alternate kind of viewpoint is altogether different than the similar referencing that comes from the number 3 or from the triangle. In astrology, the 4 are the 4 elements. The fiery signs, the airy signs, the watery signs, and the earthy signs. Unlike the attribute ideas which we understand referentially, when we look at the 4 elements, we look at them as 4 stages that complete something. Not a reference, but something that's a linear completion. And they represent 4 basic building blocks, 4 different kinds of attitudes that produce everything that is possible to be produced. We're going to look at the other tables now, and we're going to look at them relative to things external in the world. And with the elements, what we're dealing with is something much more tangible, something closer to us. So, it's not so rare as looking at only 3 points of view. The first 3 categories are ways that spiritual philosophers look at them. The spirit is considered fire. This is spirit as the definition of the term is in the dictionary. The spirit is the moving or driving force. Air is mind. That is the closest and most subtle vehicle of spirit. Water is emotion or motivation, and earth represents dense, solidified matter. Within matter itself, the same quadruplicity is there. There are different regions in the mind that different kinds of thoughts are created in, and they follow the same 4 elements. So the building tool of the mind, which is the tool of the spirit, is itself 4-part. And the ethers, which bring the energies into the physical body, that is also 4-part. And right down to the physical world that we're in, fire represents the invisible energy around us. The gases are ruled by air, the liquids are ruled by water, and the solids are ruled by earth. Now, you're going to have to sit down between times when you're not reading biographies and you're not contemplating the logical tables. You're going to have to sit down. These are very hard tables to make, extremely hard tables to make, to show the four sides of something that is objective. But these four categories are what you would use. Suppose somebody take mode of experience. Suppose somebody had a lot of planets in the fiery signs. You would say that they were a challenging person, and a lot of planets in the airy signs, that they would also be curious. But if they had few planets in the watery signs, you would say that they were low in feeling. And each of the tables for each category, I'm trying to give you words or give you concepts or spiritual attitudes that the four words or the four concepts give the four sides of that category. And so it's worth taking some time to think about it. We're going to zip through this because we don't want to be here all night. I think we're going to actually get this in within 90 minutes. Again, turning to the second page, it turns out that often there are two pairs that are really strong. That there are pairs that are really strong. And I've given all of the possible pairs. After you've looked at several hundred charts, you run into these. And you get... Yeah, you do. You run into people that are like that. And I try to use things of nature, so that if there's a lot of fire and air, and the fire is stronger, it's like a welding torch. But if there's a lot of fire and air, and they're even, it's like a steady flame. But if there's a lot of fire and air, and there's more air, it's a sudden explosion. And similarly, all of those work out. This is the lava that Don was talking about the other night, but he didn't come in when I could have told him, I told you so. Jeez. People are never around when I want to say I told you so. All right, but you get the whole idea. With the elements, you want to look to things that happen in nature. All of these tables, I think it would be good to have these in a notebook somewhere and add on to them. Sometimes you'll even find people whose work is such, like if they have a lot in water and earth, they might have a job, like they might be working with concrete setting or something like that, and you see that in their horoscope, and you get the feel of the character of the individual by the elements that are strong in what they're working with. And there are many, many, many more examples than I can give you in these in these charts like this. It's a whole lifetime. As you go on, I had one woman that had a lot of Venus, and she had a lot of air and some water. And my nickname for her was Sweet Soda Water. Ooh. Yeah, it was really, it was that kind of a person. She was fizzy, like probably one of the smartest women I've ever known in my life. Ooh. She got a PhD, 2 masters, and a bachelor's. I think she had everything was A's or A pluses, but the 2 courses she didn't get A's in that entire career. Shame. All right. Then the last table, which is greatly squeezed down, I call element trios or atmospheres. Again, what we're talking about is when 3 elements are strong and the other one is very weak, like a 3-3-1 or a 3-1-3-3 or something like that. And each of those produces an atmosphere. And just try to picture what the atmosphere is like. Like air, water, and earth. The last one is a really cold, soggy. It doesn't have the spirit driving it. And so, do you understand what I'm saying about the benefit and the conflict and the absence problem? And I think it's a fairly simple table. It's, again, one that you're going to want to build on. All right. Yes, I'm going to be that tedious. We're going to talk about 6 and 12 because we can't let our logic be incomplete. I'm a madman when it comes to mathematical ideas. We're looking at 6 and 12. We'll be very, very quick about this. We have completed one factor pair, the 3-4. Now let's look at the 2-6 factor pair. We're not going to be using the 6 at all. I just want to talk about it. With 2, we talked about polarities, and they were endless complementary opposites. When we look at the number 6, rather than looking at polarities, we look at poles. That is the line itself that we know of. And the poles can be seen as complementary comparatives. A pole is a line that is not intentionally directional. It's not a vector. When you proceed in one direction, you become more one way, but you have more possibility to be more the other way. So that the two poles always complement each other. You can't go further up without also having a further down to be able to go. So there are 6 zodiacal poles or pairs. There is the Aries-Libra pole. If there is an accentuation in the Aries-Libra pole, it is the pole of thrust and balance. In order to thrust something, you have to have balance. But in order to have balance, you have to have thrust. You can't just stand still on a bicycle and balance. But if you're thrusting forward, you can take your hands off the handlebars. It is the pole of feedback, doing something and getting something back. Immediate feedback, since it's cardinal signs. Cardinal signs are pay as you go. And the kind of destiny in the Aries-Libra pole is immediate feedback. It is also the pole of initiative and compromise. We're seeing that right now in Afghanistan. The people who are good at taking initiative need to also be able to compromise, or all of their initiative will get them nowhere. They'll be constantly at war. The Aries-Libra pole is also the pole of rawness and refinement. It's all Libra. So like if you're dealing with a pole of consciousness, that has to deal with how raw something is versus how refined you're dealing with the Aries-Libra. So it's the pole of action, and it's the mating pole. The second pole is the Taurus-Scorpio pole, and that is the pole of materialization complemented with disintegration. You can't make something in a limited sphere without disintegrating something else to make it out of. The Taurus-Scorpio pole is also the pole of rigid destiny. Thus, it is also the pole that is the stubbornness pole. And in mating, we know it's the love-sex pole. It's not mating itself. That's Aries-Libra, but it's the love versus sex pole. It's also the glacial pole, and it's the pressure pole. No two signs have more pressure on them than Taurus and Scorpio. The Gemini-Libra pole is the pole of knowledge. Gemini-Sagittarius is the pole of knowledge. The two extremes being on it, fact and theory. So it's the pole of mind, ideas versus thoughts. And it's the versatility pole. It's also the extension pole, the leverage pole, the verbosity pole. The Cancer-Capricorn pole is the parental pole. Objective and subjective parents. I should say subjective versus objective. It's also the pole that involves control, whether one actively controls or whether one actively retreats from control. It is the pole of depression. Those are the two signs that are very much involved with depression. It's the time-space pole. The Leo-Aquarius pole is the love pole. Individual versus universal love. It's the pole of centralization versus peripheralization. It's the pole of the king and the masses. It's also the pride pole. And it's the source and field pole. And sometimes it's called the luminosity pole. The Virgo-Pisces pole is the faith and knowledge pole. It's the service pole because they're both involved with service of one kind or another. It's the compassion pole. One literally feels compassion in the bowels, so to speak. It's the pole of underlings. And it is the pole, I don't know how to say it, of fussiness versus carelessness, or cleanness versus sloppiness. The whole idea is we aren't going to use a profile like this, but if you could hold in your mind the concept of 6 poles, which is not easy to do. The only time I use the poles is if I see one very much accentuated, or if I'm working with something that is accentuated with a pole, then I do it. But I never try to hold all 6 in mind and then look at a profile of which one is accentuated and which one is not so much accentuated, because it's way too big. I have a small mind and I can't handle that. We come then to 12, and that's even more of the same kind of problem. Each of us have made our observations. It's always fun to sit down with somebody and hear them spout out what they think about Geminis or what they think about Libras or whatever. Everybody has made observations about each of the 12 signs. And everybody knows from those observations that each of the 12 signs is unique. What we've been doing with these profiles is we've been looking at groups of them. But to try to grasp the whole is almost impossible. They have done psychological studies where they take people and, like suppose a bunch of birds fly by. Look at them and, without counting, know how many are there. What happens is that most people can look and see 6 or 7. It's very rare that a flock of 8 birds go by and somebody can look up and say there's 8 there. Because our pattern recognition consciousness, or our concept of a whole, is such that 7 is usually the max, which may have something to do with why music is in octaves, 7, and then you repeat back again. But 12, to try to hold 12 in mind all at the same time, it's just, I've tried it, and even if you're sitting there and there's not 12 birds flying by, but you're sitting there, you can even make a dodecahedron, and you can try to understand all 12 at the same time, and it's like a mind-busting kind of experiment. So that if you did a profile so many Aries, so many Taurus, to look at all 12 at once and what does this mean. You could do it by experimentation. There are enough astrological data banks now with famous people, and there are as many as 30,000, and you could pick out all of them that have the same pattern. None in Aries, 2 in Taurus. There's 12 factorial possibilities, and if you went through all 30,000 famous people and picked out the 12 factorial possibilities and looked at them all, you could get an understanding. But I don't know what you'd gain. Whether it would be worth it trying to do that. It's sort of be like trying to look at a big complex molecule and what is at every position in the molecular structure and how accentuated it is. Much too hard to do. So, but at least you have the idea. It's like taking all of the atoms at the same time. Because they're the two most depressive signs. They're the Pisces can be depressive, and all the water and earth signs. But in general, Moon, Saturn together is almost always the depression. All right, this is the assignment. It's That's right. That's right. We're going to take, for all 16 charts, we're going to do all 3 attitude profiles. You're going to say so many positive versus so many negative. Then you're going to make a little conspectus about that. And then you're going to have some longer notes somewhere else that you. And so then over the holiday we'll do that, and then we'll have the next session will be, I don't know if we'll even be able to get through all of it. We'll try to fly through it. But what we'll do is we'll look at all of the profiles for all 16 charts. The polarity profile, the attribute profile, and the element profile. And use the things, the handouts from tonight. And, you have a sample from last time of how we did the Gestalt profiling and what we came up with. If you want to contribute yours to the class, if you want to read it out in class, what you came up with, and how you're related to the biographical incidents in their life, that would be fine. But yeah, no. So this is no. This is the syllabus. There's a lot of them here because they're for the other class too. We're going to meet a lot of times next semester. I'm taking a very short break. We're starting much earlier than we usually do in January because I want to get a whole bunch done. I want to get all the profiling done this year, and with 16 charts, and doing as much as we're doing because we're rethinking everything here, and we're trying to get a very good, deep understanding of everything we're doing. It's going to take a lot of meetings. And maybe by then I won't have anything more to say. Yes.
I've got a question about positive, and all that. Is there a way you can put that on the board? That was the word square, was it not?
Yeah. They usually do it with a pole. The way the Platonists did it is with a line. This would be the positive pole, and the right side would be the positive, the left side would be the negative, positive. This would be the negative pole, and this would be the positive, negative. This would be the negative, negative. If you wanted to relate it to the positive would probably be fire, and the negative positive would be air, and the positive negative would be water, and the negative would be earth. These are both receptive elements, but this one has some activity in that water does wear down stone. And the whole purpose of earth is resistance, and it's negative all the way. Its whole value, for us, the earth in our body, is its negativity is what keeps it from puddling away. And its real value to us is its total resistance. Whereas if it were all fire, it would, like it would be like fighting fire with fire, and it would just burn and burn, and it wouldn't even care to leave any ash. Like what we were trying to do in the early part of the talk tonight, we were abstracting about abstraction to try and reflect into very transcendent things. That was like a positive. That was all idea and almost no practical application. We were trying to get at as deep of a spiritual attitude and mood that we could get at in referential kind of consciousness. This whole philosophy was taken many years. It didn't stay stuck with Aristotle. Many years later, it was taken back to the character of Parmenides in the German philosopher Hegel. Developed the whole dialectic method. And his dialectic method, the way he worked between positive, negative, positive, is by having an outside point. And he had his whole philosophy then was just like the talk tonight as far as triangles is concerned. He had thesis, antithesis, each having a point, and then what comes out of them is synthesis. And then out of the philosophy of Hegel, the dialectic method developed, dialectical materialism, which is what Marxism and communism was born out of. So almost all modern philosophy can be traced back to very basic goals of consciousness in ancient philosophy when they worked with the real simple rudiments. You can, like, a positive is there's nothing I can't do. I can do anything. A negative positive, I can do things, but I better think about it. And there may be a hitch. A positive negative is, well, things are bad, but I might just as well try to do something anyway. And a negative is no. It's not, nothing's going to work. And it's, that's why, like, the negative in consciousness is what is called the melancholic temperament. Every darkness. This is called the choleric temperament because it sees everything in terms of explosion and fire and stuff like that. Yes. That's right. It's the doubling. If you look at it, this is pure white. This is light gray. This is dark gray. This is black. And everything from here down is more dark than light. Can make, then each of these, you just double off them each one of those. In computer screens, very finest graphics, when you have only to choose between two things, you don't have to put 3 pixels in there. You have to choose only between two things. It's called grayscale. You get very, very fine resolution grayscale, much greater ease than if you have to use color setting. That's why to this day, if you're doing photographic work, black and white photographic work, if you're doing typesetting, you're doing drafts or things like that, just use grayscale because you have all of those, the double effect of the movie down to very fine gray. You're in the graphics business, huh? I won't. I don't like your example, but yes, other things can make up for it. I have one friend that has 9 planets positive it's a waste of time to begin with. The essential is, if you have somebody fixed in one element, the essential is in that element. If it's an essential fire, let's have it out. Who's ever got the most firepower wins. If it's earth, it's the stuff. I don't care how good your ideas are. I want something that I can touch. Or air, it's like logical structure is true. Words are right. That's it. All water. They don't want to do anything. They don't care about the logical structure. They don't care about it. They care about the feeling. Everybody's likely to lie in some ways. Smoke itself is air in earth. The little particles of earth in a lot of air. It's stretching facts a long way. Yeah, that's right in the chart. I believe I have smoke in the chart. Maybe I have a dust storm, sand blast, something like that in the chart. That's why I say for tonight, the ideas, especially the ideas in very abstract spheres of consciousness, we're going to talk. But to be able to use it, you have to, the talk was to show you how the different attributes and elements relate to each other. But to use it, you have to use the tables. You have to use your own tables according to what you see in nature, what you see in people, things like that. Tonight, as much of the talk is within the experience of the world than through the talk. That's what we after we finish the next set of things that we study are the opportunity profiles. That's the next ones that come up. This and next time we'll finish the attitude profiles, and then we'll look at the opportunity profiles. It's a totally different world there. Totally different world. Well, we did go over an hour and a half. Thank you for coming. What did you bring for Christmas? You'll be around? And maybe I'll see you somewhere. You'll be around being a lone wolf. All of them want to have some jazz. Some of them want to listen to jazz. Oh, yes. Oh, I got some records. Very good. Where was it at? Wow. I'm going to Minneapolis, Ohio. Oh, I might go to that. How do you catch on to what these things are like? On my birthday a couple years ago, that Abraham Farrar was singing. Did you hear the one Mr. Social Club? That 90-year-old man? He was singing in Minneapolis on my birthday. I almost pulled up there just for the night to see him. He's the one that I have never seen anybody with such ease sing. But I like, what's his name? He used to play at Restaurant Magnus. The guy that was with the Brooklyn School, John, the piano player. Very funny. I was around him many years ago when he went to Brooklyn School of Music. I went to that. Another one of the jazz guys. And yeah, you go out to Gadsden. Saturdays and Mondays from 6 to 10, and Sunday from 8 to 10. Yes, yes. You're starting to get into the consciousness of night. The arithmetic of the Pythagoreans. They did things like that. They would take numbers and they would break them down in that way, and they would multiply all of them. Equals that number. And they put the terms of poetry and words and things like that, and steps. So you have, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, you want to... You did what? Bought a computer. What'd you get? What'd you get?